Hi, this is Phil, and I'm here to tell you all about the Capes and Lunatics Patreon. Get early access to all of our interviews, including the monthly Chichester chats with writer and comic book legend D.G. Chichester, new episodes of classic Capes and Lunatics shows, including The Quantum Zone, This, That, or the Third, and many, many more specials, all completely uncensored. Access starts for $3 a month, full video when you pledge $5 a month. Check out the link in our show notes or go to patreon.com/CapesandLunatics. Hope to see you there.
This is Ron Marz. You are listening to the Capes and Lunatics podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sector 2814, the Green Lantern Podcast. I'm Phil. Will is here as always. We are joined by special guests, of course, Dan from the Mosaic Comics Podcast, like we announced last week, and of course, Kyle Rayner. Well, one of his fathers, Mr. Ron Marz, returning to the show. Thank you once again for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
So, yes, so we were, Will and I got to the point, because we've been going in order, we got up to, this week we were going to talk Green Lantern 176 through 181, which you wrote. So I thought, hey, let's see if Ron would like to talk those. So I think our first question was, how did you return to the book? Did they put the call out and say, hey, we need like a final arc to tie up the Cow era, or?
Yeah, I mean, the short version is they called and I answered, and the slightly longer version is DC knew that I and many other people were down at CrossGen in Florida, and that was swirling around the drain, and I think I had just left staff. I think I had, seen which way the wind was blowing. A bunch of people got laid off, and I thought, well, I don't think I need to be here much longer. So I departed, and not too long later, DC was on the phone saying, hey, do you want to come back to Green Lantern? So frankly, being suddenly freelance again, that sounded like a really good offer. And I was, besides being very appreciative because, they threw a lifeline, as did Dark Horse within a day, and Top Cow too, frankly. It was a chance to come back and kind of put a period at the end of the sentence.
Nice. And we were talking about this, a little bit beforehand. I really feel like you and Daryl Banks kind of dominate this volume of Green Lantern. It's really, there are other creators, but this is pretty much your volume, I feel like. And how did you kind of approach coming into that, this last arc, knowing, that you were there at the beginning and, this was kind of the end?
Well, I knew that we were going to be wrapping up Kyle's volume, so to speak. Even though it didn't start out as Kyle's volume, had the vast majority of the issues when he counted up at the end of it. So it was really coming in to sort of put closure on his story and close off where we had been and sort of clear the decks for Jeff to come in and do Rebirth, because I obviously knew that was coming. They were, I was actually aware of it anyway, but DC did tell me what was going on and said we want to give Kyle a proper send off. Not that we were going to get rid of him, but that we were, that he was going to step aside and Hal was going to be the main character again, just as Hal had stepped aside, willingly or not, and Kyle took over. So So it was nice to be sort of the alpha and omega of the whole thing, to be able to launch it and then close it down in a way to give as much closure as possible to the whole thing, even though I knew that Kyle was going to continue to be in the DCU, and we weren't pulling him off stage to any great extent. He was just going to step back from the floodlights.
How much freedom did you have to end the series the way you wanted? Like, were you told to reset Kyle's life to the degree that it was, or was that more your own direction?
There was not a lot of direction. There was, well, let's bring back Major Force and sort of give some closure to that, and obviously pick up some threads of where he had been. But there was a fair amount of freedom. Peter Tomasi was the editor at that point, and I'd known Pete for quite a while and done other books for him anyway. And we were friends too, still are, in fact. So I had a fair amount of freedom, but there were some signposts that they wanted me to make sure I got in there.
That's was going to be my question. So were there any mandates where, I don't think you were going to kill Kyle anyway, but it's like, don't kill Kyle, don't have him retire. The previous writer had already had this in the works, but it was like, did you have to break up Kyle and Jade, or was that your decision?
Honestly, I don't remember. You coming in after other people had been on the book for a while, traditionally you sort of pick and choose as to what you want to pay attention to. I'm not one of those writers who has to make sure that every bit of continuity gets mentioned and name checked. And, if it's something that I wasn't particularly fond of or didn't care about, just ignored it. And if there were bits and pieces that were cool that I could use, I certainly used them. So I don't recall that there were any real specific, there were any real specific things going on with what we were going to do, other than they were, there was the intimation of, well, maybe we should recreate that refrigerator moment. And, with Kyle's mom, and I was like, I don't know that that's a great idea, man. So I was sort of resistant to that. And then they kind of said, well, we really want that. So, you are playing with somebody else's toys. And so we did what we did, which was Mom in the Oven. And, really kind of a reflection of what an evil bastard Major Force was. And then obviously, we revealed that, no, it's not really his mom in the oven. But we did get to do terrible things to Major Force, which was kind of satisfying.
Nice.
Was he one of your favorite villains, or is it just because he was there towards the beginning and you wanted him there at the end? Or
well, yeah, I mean, it seemed to make sense that we would have closure on it, but also, he is sort of one of the great villains of Kyle's story, I think. He's a right bastard and took away from Kyle the thing that really that he loved most, and never really got his comeuppance for it. Plus, he's just a cool villain. I tend to like villains that are physically bigger than the heroes, so that they're imposing and they're, that visually you immediately have a sense that this character can give your hero a run for his or her money. There was not a huge amount of crazy backstory with him either. So, he was a bit cleaner in that sense. And pretty cool looking character. And had a military background, which is something I was looking for early in the run.
Gotcha. Now, you also brought Fatality back in, which was, a nice callback as well, because that was more slightly later in the run, when you introduced her.
Yeah, well, I always liked the character, and I liked her motivation. I think villains are better when they have a personal, stake in wanting that hero hurt or dead or whatever. She obviously had no pun intended, she had a serious axe to grind. with Green Lanterns in general and Kyle in specific, and John Stewart in specific. So she, she sort of made sense.
Sorry, I was just leaving room for you guys now.
Yeah, I was leaving room for Dan.
No, I mean, I definitely appreciate the character of Fatality. I just recently went back and reread every appearance of hers for a project I was working on, and it's impressive how simple of an idea she is, and yet it's the perfect kind of villain that grows organically out of a major moment in Green Lantern history. So it was kind of nice to see that at the end of this series, not only do we kind of bring Kyle back to like a blank slate, but we also kind of reset her so that she could go forward as from like her most iconic kind of interpretation.
Yeah, she was fun. Great design by Daryl. And again, it was, she was a villain who had a personal stake, and frankly, part of it was that I liked the fact that she had a slight bit of a Teen Titans tie in terms of where she came from, and the Cosmic Odyssey tie, because those are two of my favorite stories: the Wolfman Perez Titans, and then Starlin and Mignola on Cosmic Odyssey. Those guys aren't too bad. They do okay comics.
Well,
since we're sorry,
go ahead.
Oh, since we're talking about villains, this is kind of off the beaten path, but I'm curious, like, how do you feel about Hal Jordan as Parallax being remembered as a villain? Because the way it seems to me is that Hal's always been defined by having the willpower to do whatever it takes to achieve what he believes in, and Parallax was a reminder that, that's only a good thing when he agrees with you.
Well, I ultimately never saw Hal as Parallax as a villain per se. I always saw him as an antagonist, and certainly, from the hero's point of view, he was a villain because he was opposing their what they wanted to do. But Hal as Parallax was very much convinced of the righteousness of what he was doing. So in that respect, I compared him to Magneto and Doctor Doom, who are the heroes of their own stories to great extent, and both marked by tragedy in their past, particularly Magneto. So that you kind of, I always think the best villains are the heroes of their own stories, and they are the ones that you can go, well, he kind of has a point. And I wanted that to be the case for Hal as Parallax, at least for maybe part of the readership, to say, oh, well, I can see why he's doing that stuff. He's right. Things should be different. So I was, I liked Hal as Parallax. I like Hal as Green Lantern too, but Hal as Parallax gave the DCU kind of a cosmic level antagonist, which to a great extent they did not have at that point. It was, you sort of had Darkseid and Mongol, and that's about it. And then everybody else was sort of, Rainbow Raider level going.
So, you mentioned, Daryl Banks earlier. Was there a push or an attempt to get him to come back with you for these last 6 issues? Or is that a kind of a missed opportunity?
I think, I think there was, and Daryl was not available. So it made sense to bring him back, certainly, and would have been great. And obviously he and I have come back to do some things together since. But I don't think it was, I just don't think it was possible. So when we were casting about for an artist to draw the 6 issues, I had worked with Luke Ross at CrossGen, and Luke had actually come from Brazil to work for a time in the studio at CrossGen, and just we got along great. Very much my brother from another mother. And at the end of CrossGen, I had left staff, so I was at home. I wasn't even in the building anymore. Luke was back in Brazil at this point, and he was actually drawing Scion for CrossGen, which was the title that I had written for 39 issues. And then because of sort of internal politics at CrossGen, I got bounced off of that and Sojourn, because the boss's second wife, was not a fan of me in particular. And let's say I was not a fan of her in particular. So, and that's a whole other conversation.
That's really, from a fan standpoint, because I was a reader of Sojourn at the time. That's very annoying that something as crazy as that could get the creator,
well, that was it's an aside, but as Sojourn was by far CrossGen's best-selling book, and did well in the direct market, did well in the trades, in the book market. So, but the boss's wife didn't like the fact that I had some influence over the boss and could say, "Hey, that's a stupid thing. Let's not do that." Obviously, we ended up doing a lot of stupid things otherwise. Anyway, but I was, I didn't sort of just go along with things if I thought that they were not going to work out. And she didn't like, honestly, anybody else having that much of a say in things. She wanted to really, she knew nothing about comics, but she really wanted to run the show. So one day they decided to, what we should do is take you off of Sojourn and, put somebody else on it. Okay. And of course, the sales guy and the financial officer went bananas because they knew that was her best-selling book. And that was, frankly, one of the only profitable books we had. But, I had, not to get too deep into the weeds on it, but I had agreed to a salary there that was predicated on writing 2 books a month. And then a third one got added and I never got a raise. So I was like, wait a minute, I can go back to writing 2 books a month and I get paid the same thing. Okay, fine. So even though I was kind of loath to let the book go because it was very much mine. But yeah, things at that point were starting to fall apart anyway. So in any event, I stuck with Sojourn, or I stuck with Cyan and the Path for a while, and Luke had taken over Cyan from Jim Chung. I ended up leaving staff, and then Luke called me from Brazil one day, and he said, I don't know what to do. CrossGen hasn't paid me in a while. What do I, what they want, and they want me to draw the next issue. Like, what should I do? And I'm like, well, how much do they owe you? And he said $34,000.
Oh my God.
So I said, for God's sake, stop drawing.
Jesus, yeah.
You're in a hole, stop digging.
Yeah.
So I said, look, don't draw anymore. You can't draw anymore. So that was about the time that DC had called to offer me Green Lantern, and I knew Luke was, married with a family. He needed to make up that income. So I suggested Luke for the Green Lantern arc, and I said, I told him that I had worked with him at CrossGen. He was terrific, timely, and I also was very honest about, look, this guy got screwed, and we need to put some paychecks in his bank account. So that's how Luke ended up drawing the book. And I was frankly thrilled because I really liked working with him. He's a terrific artist. And he's a machine in terms of turning the pages out. So, if it couldn't be Daryl, I was very, very satisfied to have Luke draw it.
Oh yeah, the art, your art was excellent on it. There's no problem there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he brought it. Yeah,
definitely. So actually, that brings up an interesting question. So it sounds like Luke is at least bilingual, right? Being a Brazilian, I assume he speaks Portuguese and English.
Well, I think that's Portuguese. My Portuguese is a little rusty. So. He's pretty fluent. He was less fluent then, but he's obviously been working in this business in this country for a long time. So he's he's quite fluent now.
So I guess that were you working full script? And I was okay. So I'm curious if he had to have the scripts translated, or if probably not, since it sounds like he's definitely fluent in both languages.
I don't know. That would have happened on the Brazil end of things, not the DC end of things. So if there was anything that was unclear, he might have gotten it translated, or it might have been clear enough that certainly when we were working at CrossGen together. I mean, I don't speak a whole lot of Portuguese, so we would speak English in the times we were, putting our heads together for an issue, or going out to lunch or for a beer after work or something like that. Luke could, there was no language barrier really.
Oh, I would have loved to be a fly on the wall if he had to get it translated. Like, what's this line say? Mother in oven. What? Okay, so I'm sure they probably set 6 issues. You have it. If you had more issues, more time, is there anything else you would have liked to go back to or call back to from your first run?
Oh, I don't know. I knew I had 6 issues. I knew where we had to end it, and where I had to leave Kyle at the end of it for purposes of what was coming next. So that's what I built the story around. I didn't really think about, if I'd only had,
yeah. So that
more issues.
So was that one of the mandates? It's like we need him in space by the end of the story.
Yeah, that was
okay.
That was one of the mandates, and obviously that's not a big deal.
Yeah. No.
Okay, get to page 22, and I'll send him off into space. But that was one of the cards that we needed to play, was to end it here because we're going to pick him up out there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's something that I think Phil and I find a little bit fascinating. I can't speak for Dan. Is that there seems to be a real dearth of collections of this era, particularly your run, or even subsequent writers' runs. We live in the era of omnibuses, archives, trade paperbacks, and the fact that this era, this volume, really doesn't have much in the way of collected editions. Is that anything that you can speak to, or is it just one of the weird things about DC Comics?
I can't really speak to it. I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know why the third Kyle collection was solicited and then not printed. Because as far as I'm aware, the first 2 volumes sold pretty well, did well. The royalty statements, if the royalty statements I got were any indication, they sold pretty well. So I don't know. Sometimes there's just a blind spot because it's not like there's a giant computer that spits out, well, this is these are our reprint volumes. It's it's people figuring out what they think is going to sell and what we want to what kind of backstock we need and all that stuff. So and frankly also there's a media component to it as well, and certainly Hal and John are more of a are seen in other media more than Kyle is, so that I assume plays a part in it too, which is not a complaint. It's just a fact of the matter. If John Q. Public sees Hal Jordan or John Stewart in animation or live action or something like that, we're going to have more of those volumes out on the stands.
That's what I was about to say. I'm like, we need Kyle Rayner either in a live action movie or like television series, and that's when they'll start reprinting all that stuff. Anything they missed.
I would love to have a Kyle omnibus or more trade paperbacks or something like that, just so that the material is out there. But obviously out of my hands.
Mm-hmm. Well, you this of course was not your last hurrah with Kyle, because you came back post Rebirth with the Ion series, right?
Yeah, that that came out of bumping into Dan DiDio at the Long Beach Convention Center, for a show. Obviously, we weren't, it wasn't like the two of us were just hanging around the Long Beach Convention Center. although it is lovely and has a view of the Queen Mary and all that.
That would make a cool story, though.
Yeah, a couple of hobos hanging around the convention center. I bumped into Dan, and he said, "Hey, you want to come back and do more with Kyle?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And that was kind of that was it. That was the full extent of the conversation. I mean, we chatted for 5-10 minutes, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that'd be cool. We'll figure out something to do, and we'll probably come up with another name for him." I don't know if the Ion name was out there yet, or I don't think it was. But there was, so it was a move to kind of give Kyle his own identity a little bit more. And it actually started out as a ongoing series. It wasn't going to, initially it was an ongoing series. And then word came down that, well, we're going to do 12 and then see, because they were introducing 5 or 6 new series, and they were all going to be ongoings. And then it sort of got cut back to, well, maybe 2 of them will be ongoings, and, it's just numbers crunch. So again, that was just, there was not a whole lot of, you have to do this with the direction of this series. There were various and sundry tie-ins we had to do, and New Gods are going to appear in this issue, and wait a minute, no, they're not going to appear. You wrote New Gods into the issue, but now you got to take them back out, and that sort of stuff that goes on in a shared universe fairly regularly. But they just sort of let me run with it for the most part, and I was the guy who was pushing Greg Tocchini to draw, because I just think he's brilliant.
Does getting to come back to Kyle every now and then over the years, has it changed the way you think about the character? Because obviously you've had quite a long journey with him, just like he has. And I'm just wondering, like, do you still think about him the same way that you did when you started?
Not really. There's no real difference. He's the same person to me. He's more experienced now, and he's been through all sorts of permutations. He's died 2 or 3 times, but that's comics. Everybody dies. So but when I write him at his core, he's still the same character. He's still the same person. Just like, to great extent, how Peter Parker is at his core the same now as he was in 1965. The character doesn't change greatly, particularly for serial fiction, for superhero monthly characters. There's a lot of middle. There's the origin, and then there's like 50 years of middle, and you don't really ever get to the end of that story, because nobody's stories end.
But is it always an automatic yes when someone asks you if you want to come back and write Kyle, because that is your baby, you did create the character?
Yeah, generally so. I mean, if obviously if there were, if it was, if I was to, being asked to do something that I didn't necessarily agree with the character, but it's generally, it's like going home. It is. When you get asked to write like Batman or Superman, that's an automatic yes too, because there's Batman and Superman.
Yeah.
And so, but for me, it's the ones you create are much more like your babies, even though they're not really yours, and you know that going in, that going out. But there is there is an affection for the characters that you create that probably goes beyond the one, the sort of the icon characters that you grew up with.
Do you try to keep an eye on Kyle? Like, do you try to read, like, if he makes an appearance somewhere, or?
No, not really.
No.
I mean, I don't have enough time to read all the comics I want to read.
Well, it's not hard now. I mean, he is not making a ton of appearances, which is a great injustice, but.
Yeah, I keep up with what I can, and and I frankly I don't get to the comic book store as often as I want to. So, and like I said, even if I did, the books would just pile up on the floor in my office here, because I don't have time to read them. I'm too busy writing.
So reach out again, DC. We need more Kyle Rayner.
Unless I'm mistaken, I think you've still written more Kyle Rayner stories than anyone. Like,
yeah, I assume so. By the time you figure in the annuals and the one shots and the specials and the minis and all that kind of stuff, it's certainly over 100.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, do you just sort of when the opportunity arises to revisit Kyle, is that the point at which you start trying to think of ideas, or do you still have like a few reserve in the chamber ready to go, waiting for the call?
No, I think when you get the offer, you figure out where the character is and find out what the parameters are, and then you sit there, at least for me, and then you kind of figure out what you want to do. It's not like I'm sitting here thinking of Kyle stories. I actually have other stories that I need to think of because we're going to get published in the near future.
Well, I know we talked to you earlier. Was there anything, at the kind of that initial run of Kyle that you kind of left unsaid, or because you wrote the character for nearly 7 years, and really kind of, like I said, defined that era of Green Lantern. Was there anything that you wish you kind of got to? That obviously there were certain guardrails on the final 6 issues, but
yeah, I think the only thing that I look back on and feel like, oh, if I had been able to get to that, it would be cool, is which you can kind of see at the end of my initial run, is we were sort of starting to build toward Kyle refounding the Corps and having a new Green Lantern Corps and sort of having a new status quo. So that's where my intention was to do that over the next year or two of the book. But I took the gig at CrossGen, so I had to leave the book.
Mm-hmm.
So that was sort of unfinished business, and obviously that eventually got taken care of anyway. So
yeah. So there was no notes about no, don't restart the Corps or anything. So if you had more time, you would have restarted a new Green Lantern Corps.
Yeah, that was certainly where I was starting to plant the seeds of what we were going to do, and and I wanted it to feel organic, and I wanted it to feel like it was earned, that we had this era of one Green Lantern, a solo book, and kind of to a certain extent, a less cosmic book, a less outer space book, because it had been that for a while. And when I took over, obviously the notion was to be a contrast to what had come before. So, I wanted to build back towards some of that stuff. But just, ended up leaving with 125 because I had signed a contract to be exclusive to CrossGen.
Yeah, I remember at the time I was reading Green Lantern and JLA, and mostly it was because if I wanted to see Green Lantern in space, I had to see Kyle on the Watchtower.
You had to get that Black with Stars background somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And I think we said it before, but I must compliment you, sir, on that original run where it's like you kept the ship so steady. Even like they threw a bunch of crossovers at you. I don't know if it's just because Cal was the hot character at the time, but there were so many Green Arrow crossovers and DC 1 million. All of it fun, but I'm just like, sometimes people lose like the thread or it slows the momentum. But no, you kept it going through, again, many crossovers.
Thanks, I appreciate it. The book sold well. It was, for quite a while, it was selling better than Superman in Action, which sort of boggled my mind.
Wow.
Seemed to me to be an injustice in the universe. Like, I shouldn't be outselling Superman. So because of that, because your book is selling well, you do get, we need a crossover. Let's, we want to boost Green Arrow sales, so let's do a crossover. We want to, Supergirl needs a kick in sales, so why don't you have her show up, or crossover with Teen Titans or whatever it was, and that's simply part and parcel of playing in a shared universe. It goes with the territory, and if you don't like that, you're frankly just barking up the wrong tree, because that's what you signed on for when you took the gig.
So are there conversations with you when, back in the original run where it's like, oh, hey, we're going to have Kyle in the Titans, or hey, we're going to have Kyle in the JLA?
The initial conversations were that he was going to be in Titans, and there was the Titans editor offered me the opportunity to write Titans. So kind of when that Titans crossover happened, that was going to be sort of a segue into me taking over the Titans book. But then the powers that be, because of some contractual stuff, frankly, with Titans, that they were just going to end that book rather than have somebody else take it over. And like I said, I was a huge fan of, and still am, of the Perez
Wolfman Perez
Titans. That was
wasn't
really
he
the first DC book that I read.
And wasn't he still writing the book at that time? So I mean, I'd be nervous, like, oh, you want me to take over for Wolfman?
Yeah, Marv was still writing the book, and and frankly, that was one of the issues, is that Marv was the creator of the book, and he had certain contractual rights to the book, and so even though they felt like they wanted to take the book in a different direction, put a new cast in, they weren't completely able to do so, and in order to avoid hurt feelings and difficulties, they decided to just end the series, put it on the shelf for a while, and then bring it back later. So in fact, the editor and his assistant drove up to my house in upstate and spent the day, kind of figuring out what we're going to do with the book, and turned out to be nothing. But for a while I was on deck to write Titans with some of the originals, and plus Kyle and Kyle and Donna, and most of the originals that I was able to get my hand on, because that's what Titans is, those characters.
Well, and that's interesting too, because as we were going through, Kyle and Donna get broken up, which I'm assume is editorial mandate, or at that point,
like the Wonder Woman office,
that was
maybe
something that you had built up for quite some time.
Yeah, it was because John Byrne wanted to use her in Wonder Woman, because he was doing Wonder Woman at the time. So,
gotcha.
So there was the mandate came down, like, well, you got to remove Donna from your book, because she's going to go over to Wonder Woman, and that's that was her home office, so they get to make that call. And I was like, okay, well, how long do I have to play this out? And they were like, end of this issue. So that's why the breakup is so abrupt. It was just like, has to happen now, which sucked, because I liked them as a couple, and I was invested in that relationship, hopefully as much as the readers were, but we had to pull the rug out from under it. And then John really never ended up doing much of anything with her in Wonder Woman anyway, so it was kind of all for naught. But for a while it was very nice pairing, and as a Titans fan, it was really cool to be able to have her in the book, and dramatically also to have Kyle have a significant other who was considerably more experienced than he was, and could teach him the ropes, show him how this all worked.
And it was kind of sad in this arc, where it's just like, I mean, it's the nature of superhero comics, but he basically went on the dead girlfriend tour. I mean, he was, thinking about Donna, thinking about Alex.
Yeah, well, that is also, unfortunately, for quite a while was a hallmark of comics, where most of the heroes were male. Most of the lead heroes were male. And so they were going to come back every month. So if you wanted to have some sort of change in the status quo to a book, they went down the Gwen Stacy route.
Supporting characters.
Yeah, and that's certainly true of any book, really. I mean, but because it was such a trope over and over again for girlfriends, wives, because most of your heroes were male up until, frankly, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. It just became a recurring pattern. I mean, I've certainly killed off male characters in just hideous ways. male, significant others. Nobody bats an eye because it's just like, oh, that guy.
Yeah.
But it's a valid criticism.
That's why you love Major Force. He can't die.
Apparently not.
Well, and at this point, I guess Donna was dead, but obviously she comes back fairly soon. I think as Titans got rebooted or something. At that point.
Yeah, well, and some of it is creator interest. Create interest by a specific creator or creative team that wants that character back, or sometimes kind of editorial mandate because something else is going on media wise that they need that character back, or there's always myriad factors that play into those decisions. But and I guess we're all in on the joke now that nobody's really dead. They're just dead until we need them again.
Yeah. In this final arc, I had remembered that it was when Kyle and Jade broke up, but I forgot that immediately afterwards, Marin leaves John, and I'm wondering, what was it? Just to make the tragedy match, or why had that relationship just run its course?
I have no idea.
They had kind of been playing with that even before Ron came back, so I don't know if that was just.
Yeah, I mean, some of it was just to kind of clear the decks completely for a large Green Lantern reboot. To sort of go back to square one with Hal.
Gotcha. Well, and it's interesting too because with the reboot we get the Green Lantern Corps series, which was amazing with it featured Kyle, and then it wasn't long before he was in another relationship with Soranik, Sinestro's daughter, which is dangerous, I guess.
Seems odd. Cool,
But
imagine the Thanksgiving dinners; they would be so good.
Hitler's daughter. Well, okay, she's kind of hot,
Yeah.
Yes, but is that more or less awkward than when he dated Carol Ferris?
That was.
I don't know. I think Arisia is probably the most awkward.
Well,
You are correct. Very correct. Yeah, that's pretty cringeworthy. Yeah.
But different time. Not to excuse it, but different time certainly.
Silence. What? What was I going to say? Back to the point where you're making about the dead characters and stuff. Are there any extra talks with if someone wants to bring back a known character like Donna Troy? Do you have to run that past an editorial or anything? Or it's I want to bring back this character. Do you have to get the go ahead before? Yeah,
somebody's got to sign off on it, and it's sort of the controlling office of that character. It's generally the office they debuted in. So
Okay.
If you're going to do something, wherever that title resides in the current editorial divisions of who's got what books and all that. It's not like you fill out a form and request it. You just there's nothing to fill out in triplicate to say I'd like Donna Troy back. It's frankly, a lot of times it just turns out to be a shelf life issue. So some characters just kind of lose the audience's interest, and so you take them away for a while. And sometimes, in the cases of some characters, it's quite a while. And you put them on the shelf, and then when there's need, or when somebody has a good enough idea, they go, okay, we'll bring them back. That's when the retcon happens, or however you bring the character back.
Were you surprised that Hal Jordan stayed gone for so long? And obviously, he came back in different forms over the course, but from a fan perspective, you expect a Death of Superman situation where he'll be gone for a year or two, but then status quo will reassert itself. But Hal didn't get the title back for a decade, and that still amazes me.
It's 2 days. Oh no, yeah, it is a decade. Never mind.
Well, I think that speaks to the success that you and Daryl had.
Yeah, I know it's a shocking thing to say, but this is a business.
Money talks.
I'm fond of saying, comics are kind of the shotgun marriage of art and commerce. And if there's not enough commerce, there ain't going to be any art. So the real reason behind it is we were selling comics. The sales were good enough that it was a successful comic and people were paying attention to it. So when I took over the book, there was no back door. There was no notion of, here's where we're going to bring Hal back if this doesn't work. Like if there was a back door built into the system, nobody told me about it. We were just, the notion was, okay, we're going to do this, and it's full speed ahead. Damn the torpedoes. We didn't have any plan to sort of back off of it if it had not worked. I suspect if it had not worked and we had to back off of it, it would have been somebody else's job to bring it back. So pitcher comes in and gives up a grand slam in the first inning, they don't let the same guy go out there for the second inning. So,
oh no, I can speak to that. I can speak to that because I was a very casual Green Lantern fan until the Emerald Twilight. Once Cal came in, I was buying monthly. So,
well, to a certain extent, that was exactly the design of what happened, or at least the hope of what happened is that we could do this ground floor story and ground floor read and introduce a new character that people would be invested in, and maybe the audience would feel like that was a way into not only Green Lantern as a franchise, but the DCU as a whole. So it's certainly not, it's not an accident that Kyle was learning the job as he was learning about the DCU, because it was my first extended journey in the DCU too. So I wanted to play with all the toys, which is why we got, guest appearances, and, Kyle visiting, Fawcett City and Gotham, and just, sort of going on the greatest hits of DC, mostly because I wanted to write those characters. I wanted to have him interact with those characters to see what those characters look like through the eyes of a rookie.
Well, it made for a really effective ride, because I have to tell you, I was about 11 or 12 when I randomly came across a copy of Green Lantern 53, and I see like Kyle Rayner fighting with Superman fighting Mongol, and this was my first Green Lantern comic with all this gorgeous Darryl Banks artwork and a brand new Green Lantern who I identified with since he knew as little about Green Lantern as I did. And I had such a good time with that issue. I ended up reading every comic I could get my hands on, new and old. So in a way, like your work knocked over the first domino that led to both Green Lantern being my favorite thing and comics being a medium that brought me endless joy up to this point in my life.
I love it when a plan comes together.
Yeah.
Really, it was partially by design. So just, let's give people a new character that they can identify with. But it was also I just wanted to write that sort of character. I was not, I felt like if we were going to remove Hal from the lead role in the book, that the character who takes over should not be like Hal. The character that takes over should not be Hal Light or anything. And to a great extent, Hal was already a hero before he gets the ring, right? He's a test pilot. He's Chuck Yeager. I just saw Chuck Yeager's supersonic jet the other day at the National Air and Space Museum. So,
cool.
So he's on my mind, but so I wanted to have a character who wasn't that guy, who wasn't already a hero, and to a certain extent an authority figure, because that's what all of the DC Silver Age heroes were in some way, shape, or fashion. Authority figures. They were your parents to a certain extent. Whereas the Marvel characters were you. The Marvel characters were not authority figures. They were misfits and weirdos that all had some sort of flaw. They were blind or had a bad heart, or were a doctor walking with a cane. Everybody had some sort of internal flaw, whereas all the DC characters had external flaws. You know, their weaknesses were
yellow,
fire, and yellow. Yeah. So I wanted to. So my goal was really a Marvel style character in the DCU, which was not that common. So Kyle is very much built on that everyman model that is embodied more than any other character by Spider-Man. You know, Kyle is to a great extent Peter Parker, and to a lesser extent Richard Rider.
Well, you know, and I have to say, from a purely Green Lantern mythology standpoint, I love the fact that, one, you got rid of the yellow impurity because
how does
right?
How does that work?
Yeah, and second, the ring as a gas tank metaphor. I mean, I just think that is brilliant. You know, it's not going to expire in 24 hours. It's not going to expire in 10 days. It's going to expire when it runs out of energy, and there you go. I mean, I love that facet. That was really, you know, taking away that yellow impurity was really so additive to the overall mythos, at least in my mind.
I think it gave us a little bit more realistic path to tread, and it also introduced, like, the previous rules were kind of like, oh well, you know, if it's, you know, 23 hours and 58 minutes, he's still going to win because you know the ring's at full power. You know, so you know, as long as it doesn't go to tomorrow, everything's fine. You know, I think my friend Fred Hembeck one time pointed out that, like, the worst thing that, you know, the worst villain ever for Green Lantern would be like a guy dressed as a banana driving a school bus armed with a mustard gun, which sounds ridiculous, but you also go, oh, wait a minute, you have a point there. So I just kind of felt like that was a random thing, and it was also kind of goofy. So, so I broke the toys and sort of built them again in a fashion that I wanted to play with them. Doesn't mean it was better or worse. It just means that it was, you know, it's more suited to what I wanted to do with the book.
I mean, it works. I mean, no one's ever gone back to that 24-hour time limit or.
Exactly.
Yeah, because those weaknesses, like, they can be fun to play with, but at the same time, they feel just kind of arbitrary.
Yeah, they feel kind of archaic. They feel very 1962, which was probably really cool if you're 10 years old in 1962. But and I like those stories. I mean, I got the Green Lantern archives with John Broome and Gil Kane stuff on the shelf behind me. But they're time capsules to a certain extent.
Yeah, and clearing them out kind of makes room to make his weaknesses can be like things more personal to him, like his feelings of inadequacy as to how he measures up to Hal and the Corps, and what that legacy does to a person when they're the only one shouldering it.
Sure, it's the core mythology stays the same. The core concept stays the same because it's a really strong concept. You know, Green Lantern is a great concept, and it's one of the most elastic franchises in comics. It's one of the most elastic franchises anywhere because you can do a lot of different things with it. But while the core stays the same, the details evolve. The details grow and change with each era and each creative team that comes in and leaves its mark.
Well, and to speak kind of to that too, Dan did an amazing episode of Mosaic Comics that went over how the villains for Kyle spoke directly to Kyle and his journey. You know, if you look at all of them, you know, they are very much a part and parcel of Kyle and where he was at that time, which is, you know, not something that we got with, you know, previous issues definitely and subsequent stuff, but those villains are very much a part of, you know, Kyle, I feel like. And I think Dan did a really good job of talking about that too.
Yeah, I mean, when I came onto the book, it was one of the things that we talked about, you know, myself and Daryl and the editor Kevin Dooley, and even further up the chain, Archie Goodwin and Denny O'Neil, Mike Carlin, was that Green Lantern's Rogues Gallery was kind of lame. Certainly I think the best Rogues Galleries in comics are Spider-Man and Batman, and then maybe Flash, and then maybe 37th on the list was Green Lantern, because it was with the exception
old
of,
face.
Yeah, with the exception of Sinestro, not a lot of real memorable villains. So I felt like one of my jobs was to create some villains that would be appropriate enemies for Kyle. So some successful, some not, but there was I definitely wanted to bring new stuff to the franchise, or try to put a fresh coat of paint on some of the older villains.
So who would you who do you feel was Kyle's arch enemy? Is it Major Force? Is it Fatality? Is it Sonar? Who is it?
Well, I think obviously Major Force is a very personal villain.
Yeah.
Fatality is a very personal villain, and I would also, he didn't appear that many times, I would put Effigy in the conversation. I didn't get to do too many issues with him, but my intention was for him to really be as Sinestro is to Hal. I wanted Effigy to be to Kyle.
Yeah, especially since Effigy was such like a dark mirror of what Kyle's life could have turned into. Basically, if Ganthet hadn't been a benevolent figure.
Yeah, very. I think a lot of villains are that are reflections of the hero, tend to be pretty interesting, tend to be recurring villains, because they let you get a good story out of it, but you also amplify what makes your hero heroic by reflecting them against someone who is not.
All right. Last questions, everyone, so we can let this man go rate his 20 books. Going once, going twice.
I mean, most of what I wanted to ask got answered naturally in the course of other questions. So I'm just happy I got this opportunity.
Nothing else, Will?
No, I just want to say I've really enjoyed coming back and reading this.
Yes.
Particularly. Your run, because initially it was oh my gosh, my favorite character got taken away.
Yeah, he was butthurt because he was number one Hal Jordan fanboy. So
yeah, whatever. So, but at the time I didn't. I was still reading the book, but I don't think I gave the stories a fair shake. And then coming back and reading them, it's really kind of been eye opening and very enjoyable. So thank you.
I appreciate that. Well, it's very nice for you to say.
Yes, Will can admit it when he's wrong.
I'm wrong a lot.
All right, so if there isn't anything else, Mr. Marz, thank you once again for joining us, for giving us your time, which I know you're probably busy, as writing many books. But before you go, what are you working on right now? Did I see something about a Adam Warlock coming up here?
Yeah, Adam Warlock comes out tomorrow, in fact.
Oh, yes.
Excellent.
Nice.
Warlock Rebirth comes out tomorrow. That's 5 issues. That is sort of a sequel to Surfer Rebirth that Ron Lim and I did. You can neither confirm nor deny that there's maybe more coming after that. But I'm actually done writing the Warlock thing. It's all the issues are as far as plotting the issues and getting the scripts to Ron, they're done. So we got a pretty good jump on where we need to be. So Warlock comes out tomorrow. I have another cosmic graphic novel called Resolution that I co-wrote with Andy Lanning, drawn by Neto Diaz, who is drawing Predator for Marvel currently. That is currently on the Zoop crowdfunding platform, and it's done. The graphic novel is complete, drawn, colored, lettered, everything. So they opened up the campaign again for a couple of weeks for anybody else that wants to pledge before we go to press with it. That is essentially Unforgiven meets the Green Lantern Corps.
Huh.
Cool.
And I'm really happy with the way it came out. It's got additional art by Rick Leonardi. Rick did the cover. Bart Sears, Paul Pelletier, Tom Ranney, and a host of pinups for a portfolio by Ron Lim, Paul Pelletier, Liam Sharp, Phil Jimenez, Luke Ross, a dozen artist buddies that we suckered into helping us out with this. So that's current. That'll be up for crowdfunding for another week or so. And I've got a few other things that I'm working on. I don't know that I'm supposed to say this yet, but I was a script consultant on an Indian TV series that'll be out in May. And I'm part of the narrative team for Diablo 4 at Blizzard.
Oh,
Nice.
very cool.
See, I was right. He has 20 projects going. All right. So unless anyone has anything else, like I said, thank you once again, Mr. Marz. It's always a pleasure speaking to you. And again, Kyle Rayner, my favorite Green Lantern, and I think Dan can say the same. Forget Will.
We've already established he's wrong a lot. So.
Oh,
Exactly,
yeah.
Yeah, it was great getting the opportunity to talk to you.
Yeah. Thanks again.
My pleasure, guys. Let's do it again soon.
Oh, so we'll get
Yes.
to, oh, yes.
Yeah.
Talk some Ion.
Oh, Phil, we should get the Zoop link in the show notes.
Yes. Ron, can you email or message me that? I'll put that in our show notes and
Yep. Let me. You know what? Let me grab it right now.
okay. And everyone go pick up Warlock Rebirth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Warlock Rebirth tomorrow.
Yes, because I did enjoy that. I did enjoy Silver Surfer Rebirth. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. We had much fun doing it, and we're having fun with Warlock too. So I just sent you the Zoop link on Twitter. And I'll give it to you in the chat here too.
All right, but
I think that'll be up. That'll be up for another week, maybe a little bit less than. And I think if you are a Green Lantern Corps fan, this might be up your alley because it's that was one of the inspirations behind it.
Music to my ears.
Yeah, mine too.
This looks interesting. Yeah. Yes. Darn it.
Nice.
This man's gonna get more of my money.
Well, really, the art team's going to get more.
Oh yeah. Well, gotta have the story and the art.
Writers are on the back end of everything.
Oh. All right, got the link. This will go up on YouTube and the podcast. So, let's get the word out there.
Oh, I see.
Cool. Well, thanks, guys. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks,
sir.
Appreciate the interest. Have a lovely rest of your week.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a great night.
All right.
So that
was a lot of fun.
Yes, it was.
And thank you, Dan.
Yes.
I mean, we've got, I don't know, Phil, if you want to, do we want to talk a little bit about, this entire era, Kyle era, or Dan, do you have anything that you'd like
I was going to say,
about?
we talked that last time. Let Dan share his thoughts on this era of Green Lantern.
Got the 10 years of Kyle Rayner? Sure, I'll give you a brief soundbite. Jesus.
Exactly.
I
You have 30 seconds.
obviously,
Go.
as it can. Once upon a time, Kyle Rayner. No.
The point was made, and it's like I was even thinking about this beforehand. It's like that's how popular Kyle Rayner was, where it's like you basically had the Green Lantern franchise for 10 years. It wasn't Hal, John, or Guy. Kyle kept the thing.
Kyle.
Yes. They would.
I remember at the time there was like pushback from people saying like, why do we need this new kid when we already had Hal, John, and Guy? And which is funny to me every time. Like I think about that every time I see people say, well, we already have the 4 corpsmen. Why do we need Simon or Jessica or Joe? Yeah. And it's like, dude, like how many years ago were people saying that about Kyle? And then before that, how all the people, if you go back and read some Silver Age letters pages when John took over the book before Crisis, there's people writing in saying like, when's the real Green Lantern coming back? We don't need this guy. It's like literally all it takes is time, and they all ascend to that core group of beloved characters. But yeah, I mean, obviously, like I said during our talk with Ron, like Kyle and that early part of that run was what got me into comics and got me into Green Lantern. And I flash forward to today, I know more about Green Lantern characters than I do real people. Like I don't know most of my family's birthdays, but I know that Jessica Cruz's sister's cat is named Crouton.
Yes.
There's no reason for that. There's no reason at all.
That Green Lantern 53, that was your gateway. That's what I say. There's like everyone has one comic that gets them hooked, and they just dive right in.
Yeah, but it was a staple of my life growing up, and I've always been kind of afraid to revisit parts of it just because like there's that fear of like oh, the thing that you thought was so great as a kid isn't really all that spectacular. Like I grew up watching the original Transformers cartoon, and I thought like, hey, it's amazing. I'm gonna get this on DVD now and revisit it for the first time. Like I went back to it when I was like a freshman or sophomore in college and rewatched some of it because it just came out in a box set. I made it through part of one episode. I couldn't take it. It was awful. It was so bad, and that terrified me about looking back on other things I grew up with. But this arc that I reread for this podcast, like it was definitely different from what I remembered, but not in the way that I was embarrassed to have loved. More to that, I can see more layers to it that I couldn't because I was too young at the time. Like I remember, it's funny. Like when I first read this when it was coming out, and I saw Kyle and Jay's relationship fall apart. Back then, I was squarely on Kyle's side because why wouldn't you be? He was the hero of the story. This time, I'm like, well, Jen is trying to talk about this, like have a conversation like an adult, and he's kind of going off like a kid, and I don't think either of them are right really, but they're also not wrong to split, and it's so much more of a complicated thing that just didn't register with me when I was younger.
Oh yeah, that's what we said. Why couldn't he just like call her, you know, with that ring or something? He went like at least a month without calling her. It's like,
yeah. Well, that's the weird thing. Like, I remember, if I might be misremembering this, you'll probably find this out in a couple weeks. When Rebirth starts and Kyle gets that message from his ring that says like Parallax is coming, he is shocked because he has never heard a voice from his ring before. And I can't remember if they say this somewhere or if this was just something that I did some mental gymnastics for, but like I think a lot of higher ring functions are dependent on like infrastructure on Oa that didn't exist until the Green Lantern Corps was started back up again. So that's why for Kyle's entire decade of being the only Green Lantern, he wasn't using his ring as a communicator or a reference computer or like any of like the all-purpose sci-fi tool stuff. It was just like a construct machine because like that wasn't there.
I love that explanation. That's now my headcanon.
Although remember he did call Terry at least a few times when he was in the hospital and recovering. So I'm just like, why could he call Terry? Why could he call his friend and assistant, but he couldn't call his girlfriend?
Well, remember the year it was. He didn't have enough minutes on his.
Oh yes, had to flip that ring up and down. Yeah.
So he had Ganthet made him a T-Mobile power ring, and it
So one of the things that I'm coming back to this because I read pretty much through Ron Marz's run and then kind of fell off the book at that back in the time, kids life, whatever. But on this reread, Phil and I had talked a lot about this. I was looking forward to rereading it from the start, and from my point of view, the first writer on the book, his issues don't hold up as well on reread, and coming back to them 20 years later, 30 years later at some point. And then of course Ron Marz's and Daryl Banks' run, I was, I did not remember it as fondly because, Hal fan, I'm wrong a lot.
Well, again, hindsight, you didn't know what was going to happen with Hal. Like I said, now
Yeah.
you got hindsight, Hal comes back eventually.
Well, I was really pleasantly surprised by that run because there was a lot more to it than I had initially given it credit for all those years ago. And then, as we moved forward, I was really looking forward to the Judd Winnick run, which was a huge disappointment to me because it never really, I felt, delivered. And then, the Ben Robb run at the end felt, we talked about that last time, felt like, a lot of fill-in issues, essentially. So I'm curious, Dan, your take kind of on, you love obviously the Mars era and the ending. How do you feel about, the Winnick era and the Robb era?
I think by the time Ron Marz was finishing his initial run,
Mm-hmm.
I was getting a little tired of Kyle being the eternal newbie. Because, I mean, obviously, the thing that we always struggle with is the fact that, years can pass in the real world, but a couple weeks or months passed for them. But it's you start to run into this thing of like, oh, I started reading this character when I was 10, and now I'm almost as old as he is, and he hasn't changed very much in that time. He's more confident, obviously, but once we transitioned into the Judd Winnick run, and again, I haven't read a lot of these since they first came out, so maybe I'm mistaken, but I remember having this feeling of oh, this is Kyle kind of getting over that hump and coming into his own a little more, and this is where he's like, the training wheels are off. He is more confident. He is kind of made Green Lantern his own. And then we start to explore things like the Power of Ion storyline, the Brothers Keeper storyline, which, those two might color my my memory of the whole Judd Winnick era, because it's that thing like you remember the hits, you remember the big highlights, and not necessarily the full context of the entire thing. But I just remember if those two storylines had been attempted any sooner, I don't think, and I don't mean this as a diss to Ron Marz run at all, but I don't think you could tell those two stories when Kyle was in his newbie phase. It wouldn't feel right, and I don't think Kyle had matured to the point that he could handle either of those events.
Yeah, definitely not the Island stuff. No.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that the Brothers Keeper storyline is so important outside of just a Kyle story because of when it was told. It's so important for what it was when it was that I think for that story alone, the Winnick run is worth it. But I maybe I came into it with just because I was like, this is Judd Winnick, right? This is going to be great, and maybe that colors because it was really my first read of it. When we were going back through these issues, and I guess I was disappointed. Maybe it just didn't live up to my high expectations for it. Which is certainly fair, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's never going to appeal to everybody, and dependent, and part of it might also be you're coming to it as a complete body of work, with the knowledge of what comes after it too. I remember picking up every new issue off the rack as it was coming out, and then also picking up Outsiders because he was writing that, and Jade was over in that book, and it kind of felt like you were following the events. Well, you were following the events piecemeal as they were happening. It has a different feeling than going back and just kind of plowing through the sack.
Yeah, that makes sense too.
Yeah, but like we said, it seemed like early on in Winnick's run, he was very in the Kyle's personal life, even more than the Green Lantern side a lot of times.
Yeah, it's. Look ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, there was very much that focus, and one of the things when we had talked to Ron Marz earlier was that he said it's a special effects book. You've got the constructs, you've got the arts. It's it's that, and I guess maybe from my point, reading it in those batches and not reading it month to month, which you're right is very much a different experience. I feel like the pacing was a bit odd, and maybe that's colored my entire version of events that followed. So
well, I mean, like we talked about, I mean, some of Judd Winnick's run, even the last run with Jeffrey Thorne, it's like, I'm coming to a Green Lantern book, I want to see rings, I want to see constructs. So it's like, if you don't give me that, it's like, again, maybe it's just my short attention span, but I'm like, I need some more rings.
You're about to get them, don't worry.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, we talked to Jeremy Adams. I can't wait for Green Lantern #1.
Yeah, that's.
I remember, I believe it's during the Power of Ion storyline. Actually, it would have to be towards the beginning of Power of Ion, where Kyle and Alan are just sitting on like a front stoop, and Kyle's asking him like, "Hey, what? Like, I have all this power inside me now. Like, I believe he asked him, like, was it like this for you when your powers went internalized?" And Alan told him, like, this really, it's like, it makes such sense. I never really thought about it. Like, Alan tells him that, like, all his life, he had taken comfort in the fact that the power was in a ring. And if it ever became too much, he could just take it off.
Yes.
Not necessarily quit, but hey, maybe quit. It was like
or give it to someone.
It was a way to, it was a way to kind of maintain control over a chaotic existence. But now that it's within him, it's a part of him. That's probably forever, and he can't walk away anymore, and it took a long time to come to terms with it. And like, that's one of those things that makes complete sense that this character would think about, but I never thought about until they said it. And like, moments like that are what still stick in my mind about Judd Winnick's run, where if I did what you guys just did and reread all of it, maybe there will be far less of those than I think. but it really is. It's one of those things where I look back on, and like, the high points are high enough that they kind of elevate the whole thing for me. Well,
that's what I liked in this arc we were talking tonight with Ron. I had forgotten about this. It's been a while since I had read this, where he's kind of playing with it, because it was Kyle's last arc. It's like, oh, well, should I quit? Could I quit? It's like, yes, I've done good, but look at all the crap I've been put through because of this. I kind of like that, where it's basically just, Kyle coming to the conclusion. He's like, yeah, I can't stop. I have to keep doing this. And as we found out tonight, editorial mandate, let's head off into space.
Yep.
Which I couldn't believe. Like, I had no memory of how thoroughly the ground was salted so nothing would grow again in this story. Like he didn't just have Kyle leave home. He literally blew up the house.
His mother's house, yes.
And which, by the way, he knows his mom is supposed to be alive. Like, first off, you should kind of check, because Major Force tells you. Secondly, if she's alive, she comes back from the grocery store and there's a crater where her house was.
Yeah, and you just take off. I know.
You rebuilt that guy's hot dog cart. You're not going to fix your mom's house. But I talked recently on my channel about how like Kyle has not lived on Earth full time since this issue, basically.
That was my point. I've been saying the last couple of weeks. I'm just like, when's the last time Kyle had a job?
Yeah,
probably since Judd Winnick's run. Judd Winnick's run, probably.
I looked up dates. Kyle has missed at least 4 presidential elections. He has never owned a smartphone. Facebook launched the year he left Earth. YouTube launched the year after. Kyle Rayner does not know what streaming is. Like, it's such a weird thing. Like, the thing I want the most from this character is to see him try to adjust to life here, because he has literally been gone long enough to go from like like the young hip kid to the out of touch adult.
Yes, I want that.
And it's that weird thing where like, yeah, time is weird in comics, but like Kyle's points of reference are all the 80s and 90s, and he left Earth before the 2000s could really assert.
Oh my God!
So no matter how you look at it, he's been gone for decades worth of earth-changing experience.
Dan, I want that. Yes, please make him the Captain America, the man out of time. Yes, bring him back to Earth, and it's like, yeah, he's all out. He doesn't know the trends, doesn't know the technology. Yes.
Could you imagine him trying to walk back into his art career today?
God, yeah.
Like the way you make art, like what is digital art?
Yes, has digital. Yes.
What are art streams? What's an NFT? AI what? Like,
yeah.
Everything has changed.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Yes, because when he started, he was like the young, cool, hip kid. Yes, I want that.
And it's funny because it's really you see that so much with Kyle, but once Rebirth kind of takes off, all of the Green Lanterns are out in space. They don't come back for so long. I mean, literally, almost 20 years. And it's weird, because we're getting Hal to come back. And, I mean, there was even, I think you talked about this on your channel too, Omega Men with Kyle, right, Dan?
Yeah. Yeah, that was, as far as I'm concerned, essential reading for Kyle Rayner fans.
Oh yeah, the Omega Men stuff. Like I haven't read it yet. We'll get there. But like a friend, one of my other co-hosts, she's not even like the biggest Kyle Rayner fan, but she loved him in Omega Men. So yes. I cannot wait to get to that.
Yeah, I will say, like we get a little bit of a break from space when Simon and Jessica have their book Green Lantern.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Which is the worst name for any Green Lantern book because it sounds identical to the regular one, but even then, they stayed on Earth for a year or so, and then went to space. So it's like, I don't know. And those characters specifically, everything about them that makes them interesting is tied to Earth. And their relationships on Earth. So it's, I don't know. There's enough characters that you should always have at least one Green Lantern book or side plot or whatever happening on Earth.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what I said. The Justice League, they should have a rotating chair for a Green Lantern. I mean, you can rotate Green Lanterns in and out of that chair, but there should always be you have enough Green Lanterns. There should always be one in the Justice League.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Jessica and John have been probably. I mean, Kyle was on there during some pretty important runs of Justice League.
Oh yeah, Grant Morrison,
Chris, but I feel like John and Jessica probably have more cred potentially with the League because they've spent so much time on it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jessica is the only Green Lantern that Batman liked from the beginning.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I mean, if you ask her, it's probably a bad thing because all the crap she was dealing with to start. But
I mean, I don't think he hated Cal. He just probably thought he was inexperienced at first, which he was. But it's like, oh yeah, he hated Gardner, and he hated Hal after he. Well, we're gonna get there after Hal comes back, man. Oh, Hal, he's ready to punch the Spectre in the face when Hal was the Spectre.
Yeah. Actually,
that's he's Batman. He's got some anti-Spectre spray or something.
Oh yeah. That's something that Phil and I have talked a lot about. Is the Spectre series by J.M. DeMatteis, and
which hasn't been reprinted anywhere.
How under the radar? I mean, I don't even remember reading it when it was coming out. And I love Hal Jordan, but it's such an interesting series that nobody really talks about. Have you had a chance to read it, Dan?
I've read. So at the time, I wasn't in the right headspace for that kind of book. Mm-hmm. I didn't really have like when I started reading, Hal Jordan wasn't really front and center, so I didn't have like that draw to the character, and I looked through. I breezed through some issues in the comic shop and saw like a lot of like heady metaphysical stuff. I'm like, what is this? I think I read like there's an issue or two where like Sinestro shows up, and like I think the one issue I bought was the one where he goes to Apocalypse, because I'm like purely on that like teenage like, oh, the Spectre versus Darkseid, that's gonna be so cool. But it's looking back, I wish I had bought that whole series because it sounds like it would be something right up my alley now.
Yeah, it is. It is phenomenal, and it's not anything like I expected it. And I expected, hey, let's take this science fiction hero and merge it with this horror essentially hero or something and see what happens. And I was like, no, I just don't want any part of that. And once again, Phil, I was wrong, right? So it is really, there are some, I feel like the strongest part of that book is probably within the first year, because there are like 3 or 4 standalone stories that are just amazing, where it deals with, forgiveness and redemption and, really, you're right, really heady metaphysical stuff. And it's just, it's a wonderful series.
Again, it's never been reprinted. It's not on the DC app. I mean, it's J.M. DeMatteis, for God's sake. Come on.
I mean, if you told me tomorrow that James Gunn wants to make like a Spectre film trilogy or something, I would believe you, and it would be great because maybe we would get some of this stuff out there again.
Yeah,
exactly. It's not very long. Isn't it only like 15, 16 issues or something like that?
No, it was like, what was it, 27 or something?
4 or 27,
yeah, it was like 20-something.
I ignored this way longer than I thought.
Oh, yeah, well, that's what I said. I was reading Green Lantern at the time, and I didn't read this when it was first out, and like I was reading Green Lantern, I would forget that the Spectre series was out because they didn't really promote it. You'd think if they promoted it anywhere, it would be in the Green Lantern books. It's Hal Jordan, but no.
Yeah.
I love the fact that, like, I think I brought up earlier in the call, like, the conventional wisdom is that, we're gonna break Batman's back, but within 2 years he'll be back again. Same with Superman.
Wonder Woman, yeah.
Yeah, but when it came to Hal Jordan, they just kept doubling down on it. They're like, oh yeah, we're not gonna bring Hal Jordan back. In fact, we're gonna bring him back as the Spectre. Oh, and by the way, we're going to change the Spectre as much as we just changed Green Lantern. How about that?
Yeah, it's, and I think it really was
the sales.
Totally the sales, but I don't think Green Lantern as a concept or Hal in particular as a character was anywhere close to those top.
He wasn't a household name like Batman and Superman. Yeah, no, definitely not.
No. I think Green Lantern, like, it feels weird to say because I love so much about this stuff, but like Green Lantern is on some levels a harder sell because it's a concept that's more complicated than like Batman or Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Just like with those kind of characters, like you get it immediately, like their backstory, their motivation, their powers, the street level nature of it. Mm-hmm. With Green Lantern, it's like, all right, here's this grand cosmic mythology. Here's a bunch of magic. Here's all these aliens. Here's the history that goes back a few billion years. And it's like, and that's why, like, I'm hoping that the Jeremy Adams run kind of helps ground Green Lantern a little bit, and because that's more than anything, we need that as an entry point. We need something relatable that a wider audience can latch on to easily. Well,
that's what I've been saying. It's like, it seems like all the Green Lanterns have been off in space for at least a decade, and it's like I kind of like a balance in my cosmic characters. Doesn't even have to be Green Lantern, where it's like, yeah, you can do your space stuff, do your cosmic stuff, but at least a couple issues a year, I want him on Earth punching a supervillain in the face. You need like a balance.
Yeah,
with a giant boxing glove. Sorry.
Oh.
You know what's crazy to me? In a world where literally everyone was forced to live through months and months of lockdown, we have never had a story that examines the 3-year period in which Jessica Cruz was a shut-in in her apartment. This is a character. This is like she is my favorite Green Lantern right now, just because of her unique relationship with the concepts of willpower and fear, and how like this character lets us play with that in a way that hasn't really happened before in the franchise. And her origin story was built on an experience that has since become a shared experience of the
For
entire Earth. So why haven't we had a Jessica Earthbound book?
Was that it?
That time?
Yeah. But I mean, since the lockdown and everything, I mean, that was probably the era. Isn't that when we got the Grant Morrison Hal book?
Yeah.
For some reason, we only had one Green Lantern book, pretty much. You know, we had this.
Two.
That
Far Sector.
Oh, that's right.
Sector.
Yes. Yes.
Excellent book. Well, and, you know, you talk about you know, the very turbulent last few years we've had. I'm conflicted with, you know, the whole space cop as, you know, easy metaphor, because, you know, I have issues with that as, you know, since what we've lived through, you know, in the past, you know, that type of authoritarianism, you know, and, you know, it is such an easy metaphor, but, you know, I again, I'm conflicted about it. And I know you've talked about it a little bit too, Dan, and Phil and I have talked about it some as well.
Yeah. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, like, there is value to having Green Lanterns as law enforcement, as long as the writers and publishers are willing to engage with the kinds of things that could mean. Like, I think it's too reductive to take a position of, like, all cops are bad or all cops are good. Like, that kind of black and white split on it, like, isn't it.
But
you
you have to show the bad with the good, where it's like, you know, if they are cops, there are bad Green Lanterns out there, you know, unethical Green Lanterns. Yeah.
I mean, but like a big thing is, like, they touch on that, but they take the approach of, like, well, there's a few bad apples, but other than them, you know, but, like,
it's all good.
Yeah, I mean, like, one of the things that I appreciate so much about the Kyle Rayner era is that Green Lantern was not anything official. He was just a superhero.
Yeah.
He was just, and, like, I look at the Green Lantern Corps and I'm like, you know, as interesting as the cop metaphor can be, everything I'm interested in about this isn't really tied up in that. Like, why aren't they just the biggest superhero team in the DC universe?
Yeah.
You know? I am all for exploring, like, the weird ethical and moral gray area that goes along with them being a police force. But it's really hard to do that when you also insist on portraying them as the altruistic heroes who are always doing the right things for the right reasons. That's why I think, like, it's actually, like, a better exploration of this is Cullen Bunn's Sinestro series.
I've not got to that yet. I've been trying to get the back issue, so I'm glad that you're recommending that. So I'm really looking forward to it.
It's very, very good.
But again, I mean, the Green Lantern Corps has, like, a built-in thing to show, you know, maybe these people some of these Green Lanterns aren't unethical. Maybe it's just they come from they're aliens. Some of them are, you know, their society doesn't see certain actions as unethical like humans would.
Well, I feel like we get this really swing into the militarization of them as a corps and not necessarily as, you know, peace officers. Or I've always kind of...
Well, you said first responders. I know the one.
I kind of like the idea more of first responders, or, you know, one of the things that we keep going back and forth on is that, you know, space is big, really, really big. And as much as I do like to see these characters together, you know, you could have 7,200 lanterns that, you know, in the course of 10 years don't run across another lantern, because a sector is essentially infinite because it's a slice of the universe, right? And I feel like it's, you know, the militarization is you're going out and you're enforcing order, which, you know, order and the Guardians. But for me, I would prefer, you know, like, look, we have deemed you worthy. The Ring has deemed you worthy. Mogo's deemed you worthy. Whatever, based on traits that we value. Here is something that you can use to go help the people in your the sentients, you know, in your sector, versus enforcing order. And that's, I don't know. Me and Hal have problems with the Guardians, I guess. You know?
Yeah. No, you're right. You're both right to have problems with them. I mean, there was actually just a few days ago, as we record this, a preview page was put out for I guess Marvel's next Avengers book, and it's a page of Tony Stark and Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, sitting down. They're putting together the roster of their new team. And Tony says to her, he's like, all right, so you ready to get back to policing the world? And she says, no. The Avengers aren't cops, or at least they shouldn't be. The Avengers are firefighters. We're the ones who fly into the blaze wherever it is, because we're the ones who can, so we're the ones who have to. We save lives, and that's it. That's our whole mission statement. And I read that, and I'm like, why isn't she the leader of the Green Lantern Corps? Like this.
Let's draft her.
Well, I wonder if that's going to be because they are rebooting Avengers again, and Jed McKay is going to be the new writer, and he is a good writer, so I could see him being the one to write that scene. Yeah.
But like I remember, like I don't remember if you guys have read this. Have you read the Robert Venditti run on Green Lantern, or Hal Jordan the Green Lantern Corps?
I think I've I've read a couple of issues. I'm finishing out that run so I can read it all at once as well.
Okay, because he has a Dark Star storyline that directly talks about a lot of this, and I will say I respect him for trying, but because I don't want to talk too much about it because you haven't read it, but it's one of those things where like it's something that I found ultimately unhelpful, because it kind of acts like the problem is this one specific thing, and as long as you don't cross that specific line and do that thing, everything else is fine. And it's like, no, that excuses a lot of other things that are also very, very bad, but we kind of celebrate these space cops for doing because they're superheroes. And we when Batman beats somebody up, okay, he's a vigilante. When Guy Gardner beats somebody up, he's a cop using extreme force.
Yes, exactly.
Some might say he's using major force, but I don't know.
All right,
Nice.
but all right, all right, there you go. All right, I'm gonna cut. All right, I'm gonna cut this short because I have to get up in the morning and I have to go to the bathroom.
Okay.
All right, all right. I thanked Ron, Dan. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, this is a lot of fun.
You are a friend of our show. Tell people about your podcast. Where can they find it? What's going on?
Well, once everyone is all caught up on this podcast, you're welcome to come on over to the Mosaic Comics YouTube channel, where I do long-form analytical essays about characters and themes from all over Green Lantern publication history, as well as new issue reviews and audience Q&As. It's always a good time, and there's a 3-year backlog of videos waiting for you. So head on over to Mosaic Comics on YouTube so we can keep enjoying our favorite thing together.
And Dan's not going to say it, but those essays are excellent and extraordinarily insightful.
I'll say it.
Go watch and listen.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And thank you guys for reaching out. Like, I've never talked to Ron Marz before, and I've never had the chance to speak with either of you before. So tonight was a really fun opportunity.
Oh yeah, it was
Thanks
great.
for being on.
I was gonna say it was great talking to you too. You would have been the center of attention, but we had Ron Marz.
Hey, I don't mind.
All right, before I get to our plugs, watch Will jump out of his seat with Joy Dan. All right, next week we'll cover JSA 60 through 62. It's a Spectre story, but then in 2 weeks, the one Will has been waiting patiently for 117 episodes. Yes, in 2 weeks we get the Green Lantern Rebirth. So,
well, but what do you mean? You finished the Kyle Rayner run. That means you can stop.
That's true. Yeah. Oh, he would murder me. He would murder me. Since episode 1, he's been like, "Oh, I can't wait to get the Rebirth. I can't wait to get the Rebirth." That is your favorite Green Lantern story, isn't it, Will?
There is so much about it that I love, and I feel like it's like a master class by Jeff Johns in how to take and reboot, a concept of mythology. It's just so well done. I love it. I love it a lot.
I can still hear some of the dialogue from the resurrection scene in my head. The whole, like, I wake up from a dream and all that
Yeah.
stuff. Very good stuff. Very good. Can't wait to hear what you guys think about it.
All right. So, yes. All right, kids. So, yes, send us your thoughts. Email us, CapesandLunatics@gmail.com, or call the voicemail 614-382-2737. That's 614-38-CAPES. And remember, you can find all things Capes and Lunatics on our website, episodes, social media, merchandise, the Patreon, everything. It's tubespace.io/CapesandLunatics Podcast Network. That's tubespace.io/CapesandLunatics Podcast Network. All right. Mr. William Allred, besides being a number one Hal Jordan fanboy, I hear you write some comics.
I try.
Do some podcasts. So yes, do the plugs, Will.
All right, I'll do the plugs. Hey, you can find me at Wallred, WALLRED, on Facebook and Twitter and Gmail and probably other things as well. If you're interested in some of the comics I write, you can check out Crossover Division at crossoverdivision.com. Thank you, Phil. We're getting ready to launch next week the collected hardcover edition of the first 4 issues, which is going to be a lot of fun. And if you'd like to check out Diary of Night, you can check out Diary of Night at diaryofnight.com. It's a vampire story. And if you would like to hear me annoy a different podcast host on a regular basis, you can check out Explain Yourself, where Kevin Joseph, the writer of Tart, and I bring on comic book Kickstarter creators and have them showcase, their active projects on Kickstarter. It's about, getting more eyeballs on indie comics. So you can check us out Friday nights at 11 p.m. Eastern. It's called Explain Yourself. And finally, you obviously have great taste because you're here listening to us, which means you also love Quasar, which Phil and I both love Quasar. If you'd like to find out more about Quasar, you can check that out at the Quantum Zone, quantumzone.org.
Oh yeah, YouTube. The playlist is on YouTube, our YouTube channel, kids. So yes, lots of those were live reads of comics. So very entertaining.
Some phrases that appeared in a Marvel comic that I can't believe appeared in a Marvel comic.
Hey, yo, boys, you look at the party. I love the party.
Oh, you mean
they aren't even attempting to enter our orifices?
That's the one. Yep.
That was from a Fantastic Four issue. The 90s. The 90s. It was the Wild West. All right.
Oh, and we need to put the Mosaic Comics link for Dan in the
yes,
show notes as well.
Yes, yes. I was gonna Dan, if you want to send me that link, I'll put yours in there. I'll put Ron Marz in there.
Yeah.
All right.
And Dan, I'm sure we could probably chat with you many more hours, but Phil's a weenie, so whatever. I would like to chat with you one day in depth about Mosaic because.
Yes. Hey, it is still, like, all baggage aside, all unfortunate things aside, it is still my favorite comic book series, and it is the run that, honestly, it changed the way that I think about superhero comics and is largely responsible for me still being a Green Lantern fan.
Awesome.
So, yeah, it's a very complicated soup.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right, let's get out. Yeah, we'll have to have you on one week, Dan, when we don't have any other guests. So yeah, we'll get in depth here. All right, here now I'll do the theme music since I don't know. I shouldn't even do it here. I was gonna say I don't like making guests sit through music and stuff, but yeah, I can always add it later. But Dan's one of us; he can sit through this.
I love this music.
Yes.
Rock on.
2 weeks, Will. Rebirth in 2 weeks.
Looking forward.
Can't wait to them for the balloons and streamers, what you're going to have during that week. All right, kids, come back next time. And remember, think your road trip is long? Try leaving your mother homeless and flying into space. Good night.